Good evening and welcome to User Manuals for Humans Part 7. Today we will talk about exercise. We're going to talk about why, how, and what. And as usual, we will not simply tell you what to do, but we will explain what happens in the body so that you have an understanding health-wise of why things happen in the body and what you can do to exercise appropriately for your particular condition. First of all, exercise is basically, for every cell in the body, is use it or lose it. When you exercise, you use every single cell, every single organ system in your body. And just to reiterate a little bit, talk about muscle cells, bone cells, and brain cells. How do you use a muscle cell? You put tension on it. You put weights, you put a resistance on a muscle, and you will stimulate that muscle to be maintained or grow. How do you use a bone cell? You put weight on it in a field of gravity. That gives the bone a message that it is being necessary and therefore needs to make more bone to stay strong for future demands. How do you use a brain cell? The purpose of the brain is to process information, to process electrical signals in particular. So the way to use a brain cell is to send an electrical signal to it. And you do this by triggering receptors. And we have receptors for light, we have receptors for sound, we have receptors for touch, but most of the receptors that we have are for the purpose of detecting motion and changes in muscles and joints. So when we exercise, we get a bigger effect of electrical activity on the brain than virtually anything else that we can do. We'll go into a little bit more detail, but basically the very foundation of exercise is use it or lose it. And because your body is made to be used, it is not possible to optimize your health without exercise. And we'll get into what exercise is also. It does not have to be painful. So some of the benefits are that you strengthen the system in general. You reduce insulin resistance, which means you reduce the incidence of pre-diabetes. We talked about that a few weeks ago. Please feel free to go back and refer to those videos. That a muscle that is exercising does not need as much or hardly any insulin to accept the sugar into the cell. That reduces insulin resistance. We also, and this is probably the reason that most people think they need to exercise, is to improve circulation. This is more of a byproduct. It is still important, but it's not the primary reason we want to exercise. Improved circulation improves oxygen delivery to the tissues, it improves nutrient delivery, and it improves the exchange of waste and nutrients in the tissues. It also strengthens the heart, but most importantly, it strengthens the brain. And we talked about last time how the brain has 4 absolutely necessary forms of inhibition, and therefore when we talk about stress and we know that the brain inhibits the stress, that may be the single most important function of exercise, is that exercise stimulates the brain and therefore we can reduce the stress directly with that. And if we didn't know anything else, that would be enough reason to do something about exercise. So let's talk about drawbacks. And you go, whoa, you mean there are drawbacks to exercise? Everybody says to exercise. What could possibly be wrong with it? Well, we can certainly do too much, and we can do the wrong kind for what we're trying to achieve. The first thing that we need to realize with exercise and the drawbacks is that exercise is stress. Exercise breaks the body down. But at the same time, exercise and activity is something that we're designed for. So even though exercise breaks the body down, it's a natural form of stress that as long as you get the appropriate recovery, you will regain strength and you will rebuild the body to a point where it's stronger than it was before. So yes, it is stress, but it's a good form of stress. It can, however, be bad if we do something that the body isn't prepared for. And we'll talk a lot about this. Healthy people can tolerate a lot more exercise. Weak and fatigued people, which is actually most of the population over 30 or 40, need to be very careful. They cannot tolerate very much exercise, and especially not high intensity exercise, because it is a too high a form of stress that it stresses their adrenal system and their hormonal system further. And even though there's some benefit to it from a fitness point, they actually break their body down and they become more unhealthy, even though they seemingly are doing a good thing. Let's talk a little bit more about the circulatory benefits. We know that with exercise, the heart pumps faster, and therefore, according to the use it or lose it principle, the heart will respond to that imposed demand and it will grow stronger. This means that the stronger heart muscle can fill better. The heart will typically get a little bit larger, so it can fill with more blood, but the main difference in the stronger heart is that it can contract more forcefully and expel more of the blood. The portion, the quotient of the blood that they're sending out is a larger percentage, and therefore the heart beats more effectively. When the heart beats more effectively, then it takes fewer beats overall for every minute of your life except during the exercise, and therefore, as the heart beats fewer beats, there's this theory that you will actually have a longer life. And there's certainly no evidence to contradict this. The next benefit of circulatory benefit is that it increases your blood perfusion. That you have these big arteries, you have smaller arterioles, and then you have capillaries out in the peripheral tissues. And these capillaries, they're not always wide open. They're only kind of open enough for a few blood cells to trickle through. But during exercise that lasts more than 20 minutes, the capillaries open up all the way and we have full blood perfusion, which means that there's a full exchange of nutrients and waste in the tissues. And we don't really get to that point until we've exercised for about 20 minutes. There's also enzymatic processes in the body, that everything that happens in the body to produce more energy, to take advantage of oxygen and glucose and convert it into energy, all those enzymatic and metabolic processes are upregulated. That means that they happen more efficiently and they happen easier, so that we have an increased capacity to do that in the future. In other words, the body simply runs better. Let's talk a little bit about mitochondria in the cells. Mitochondria is a cellular component that actually produces and manufactures all of your energy. It is the component inside your cell that can take oxygen and utilize it and turn it into energy. And when you exercise, you upregulate the number of mitochondria. You will literally build more of them in response to that exercise, so that you'll have a better utilization of oxygen and you'll have the capacity to make more energy for yourself. That's certainly something to keep in mind in times of chronic fatigue. My favorite cartoonist, again, Glass Bergen, he has this guy at the doctor and says, "For years, your teachers kept telling you to settle down and sit still. You can stop now." So let's talk a little bit in detail about the brain benefits. That the brain is composed of tissue made up of cells, and these cells, just like every other cell in the body, is use it or lose it. If you don't send electrical impulses to it, the cells will get weaker and have less work capacity. So if we have the brain up here, and the brain regulates a body part, and here's the body part, and the body part has receptors, and the receptors send more information, then this information will strengthen the brain and increase the brain's capacity to regulate that body part, and it got more information and so forth. So it is like a positive feedback cycle that feeds on itself, that the brain's ability to regulate this body part is based on the information that the brain gets from this body part. And if this body part doesn't move, then the brain gets less information, the brain gets weaker, and we have a negative feedback cycle, negative cycle. So that's why with exercise we strengthen the brain and we increase the brain's ability to regulate, and overall we have better body control, and with that we have fewer pains, fewer diseases, and so forth and so forth. Plus, I might add better athletic performance, and that's essentially what you do with athletic performance, is that you practice a behavior that becomes a pathway that strengthens certain brain cells so that you'll be better able to do that in the future. And one of the primary benefits of chiropractic is that if we have a body part, in particular maybe a bone, a joint somewhere that isn't moving properly, this creates this negative feedback cycle so that the brain gets weaker and weaker, has less capacity to regulate this body part until we adjust it and restore these communication pathways. So the brain benefits, the reason people get so healthy and we fix so many things with exercise is that the brain gets activated. I cannot state that enough. The number one reason to exercise is for the brain. Everything else is pretty much a side effect. So now we will talk about something called ATP. Has anyone heard of ATP? You guys actually have. Very good. So ATP stands for adenosine triphosphate. And it simply means that there's a little molecule over here called adenosine that is linked to 3 phosphate molecules. And this last bond, the chemical bond right over here, is what we call a high energy bond. And this is the way that humans and every other cellular life form uses energy, is by breaking this bond we release energy that can be made available for work in biological life forms. Then once we break this, then this phosphate shoots off, and we have what's called ADP, adenosine diphosphate, which simply means that there's 2 phosphates attached. And now we can't have energy available until we use some other form of energy to stick this phosphate back on, so we have ATP again. So this exchange is the energy to put the phosphate back on is the energy that we get from food. So the only reason that we have oxygen and glucose and we eat calories is so that we can put the 3rd phosphate back on. That creates a high energy bond that when that bond is released, we free up energy that can be used in biology, biological life forms. And what do we use? What do we use ATP for? Everything. Nothing happens in your body basically without ATP. So let's start with membrane transport. What does that mean? Well, shuttling tiny little molecules across a cell membrane requires work. the number one thing that the brain does in terms of signaling, virtually all signaling is just shuttling little molecules, little ions across cell membranes, and that requires work. So your brain is 2% of your body weight. It uses 20% of your calories. And those calories are converted into ATP so that you can shuttle molecules across membranes. That is what signaling is. What else do we do? Well, muscle contraction requires ATP. Heartbeats require. So anytime a muscle does anything, that also requires ATP. And biosynthesis. Those molecules, when we make hormones and enzymes and proteins and new cells and DNA and RNA, those molecules don't just pop together. They require energy to be synthesized, to be assembled, and that's also what ATP does. So ATP is the energy currency in the body. Now, we have just a tiny, tiny little bit of ATP in the body at any given time. This exchange, we have ATP, we break it off, and then energy from food puts it back together. We actually use our entire body weight worth of ATP every day. So this popping off and reassembly happens about 1,000 to 1,500 times on the total amount of ATP in a given day. So if you weigh 200 pounds, you're assembling 200 pounds of ATP in a day. So for any given, the base amount that we have at any given time will give us about 3 seconds worth of maximum intensity activity. So let's talk about how all of this happens. Where does energy come from, and why and when do we assemble more? So visualize the Olympic final in the 100 meters. You have the guys lined up and they get ready and the gun goes off and they take off. They have ATP, they have energy for 3 seconds worth of work. Then as soon as they start breaking off ATP, the body starts using glucose to create more ATP. Otherwise they wouldn't make it to the finish line. You see all of them just fall flat-faced at the 30-meter line. So somehow they make it through, so the body makes more ATP as it goes. And the best source of ATP is called anaerobic metabolism. That means that we're using oxygen and glucose to make new ATP as we go. And that is by far the best, because one single molecule of glucose can make 38 new molecules of ATP. The problem is we can't get the oxygen in fast enough, and there's only so many mitochondria to do this. So in a fast sprint race like the 100 meters, we don't have time to replenish the ATP fast enough. So we have some to start with, we start making more, but it's still not enough. So now we use another source of ATP, and that is we make ATP from glucose without oxygen. And this is a really fast way to do it. The problem is we only get 2 ATP molecules for every molecule of glucose. So it's 19 times more efficient to make it with oxygen, but when we don't have the oxygen when available fast enough, then we have to make it without oxygen. And the problem is that there's a byproduct of lactic acid. And lactic acid is toxic to the muscles and it hurts really bad. And we also run out of glucose. So we can't rely on that source for very long. So when we look at these sources, we have ATP for about 3 seconds worth of activity. Then we can break down glucose into lactic acid and make it last about 1 minute. So that's the guys who run the 400. They're using almost entirely the metabolism, the anaerobic metabolism that produces lactic acid. But they can't go much further than 1 lap because they're getting too toxic with lactic acid and they're running out of glucose. But if you slow down a little bit and you start running 10,000 meters and marathons, now you're slowing down the activity enough that your metabolism, your oxygen supply can keep up. And that is primarily aerobic metabolism. And that's a very efficient, and because of that, you can keep going as long as you have fat and carbohydrates in the body, which is several hours. Now, the other thing that we need to consider is how stressful is this for the body? So, only using ATP is not very stressful because it's already there. It's just available. We just have to demand it and off it goes. But breaking down glucose into lactic acid, the anaerobic metabolism, is very stressful. And therefore, we can't keep it up very long, and it's a huge burden on the body. The aerobic metabolism, the purely aerobic, is very moderately stressful. So we'll get back and talk about how people should exercise, but this is why we want to keep this in mind, that aerobic metabolism is not very stressful, anaerobic metabolism is quite stressful. Very good. So, types of exercise. We've mentioned these, but we'll go into a little bit more detail. Aerobic metabolism basically means that we exercise keeping our heart rate at or below 120 beats per minute. And this is not a number carved in stone. It's not true for everybody. There's a range, there's a give and take, and you got to figure it out for yourself. But basically the way you determine is at 120 beats, you can breathe comfortably through your nose. You do not have to breathe through your mouth, and there is no panting involved. You can also, if you have someone next to you on the bike or running or walking, you can maintain a relaxed conversation. If you start panting and you can only huff and puff and produce single words between your huffs and puffs, it is not aerobic metabolism anymore. Another criteria for aerobic is that we have no lactic acid. You do not feel any heaviness in the body, and there is no burn. Anaerobic means without air. That means most of it is still coming from oxygen, but we're going faster than what the body can keep up with as far as oxygen. So part of it has to come breaking down into lactic acid. This is, again, it's a range, it's a give and take, it's not an absolute number, but from about 130, 140 and up, then it is anaerobic. And all the way up to maximum heart rate, it's purely anaerobic, the closer we get to maximum heart rate. The way we know maximum heart rate is roughly 220 minus your age. So if you're 50 years old, then your heart rate, your maximum heart rate is around 170. If you're 30 years old, it will be around 190. Just a little thing as a gauge. Anaerobic means we're starting to breathe through the mouth, or we're starting to breathe through the nose with flared nostrils and sounding really loud. Conversation becomes strained, and we also start getting some muscle burn. So there's two different types of exercise as far as metabolism, aerobic and anaerobic. Other types of exercise is also things like weightlifting. Weightlifting has a different purpose. Weightlifting is putting tension on muscles for the purpose of improving muscle tone and or muscle mass. So depending on how you do that, you can either create tone or mass. We won't cover a whole lot of that today, We might come back to that. And then there's event-specific training. And this is not so much training for improved circulation or burning calories or improving muscle strength, but it's specific to an event. So we want to improve a skill, and this is all about improving the way that the brain and that muscle coordinates their activity to perform that skill. What this means in terms, and on the next slide, what this means in terms of what we can do. Aerobic means we keep it below 120, and those can be things like walking, biking, swimming, skating, yoga, tai chi. And again, we want to get a heart rate monitor so we can measure and make sure that we stay below. It is possible to walk and get above 120. You can bike and get over 120. So it's all about the intensity and how fast you go. Most people get very surprised at how quickly they get up to 120. For people who are used to anaerobic type stuff, to doing aerobics at the gym and no pain, no gain type mentality, they will not feel that they're doing anything when they're getting up to 120. They'll feel like, what's the point of this? But that is, for most people, the intensity they should be at for the most part. Anaerobic is 130 to 140 all the way up to max. And again, I listed the same things: walking, biking, swimming, skating, but I also added running because that's what most people would incorporate. And all you're doing is you're picking up the pace and you're making it a little bit harder. Weightlifting, again, improve tone and mass. So if you want to improve tone, then you want to limit the weights and increase the repetitions. If you want to improve your mass, you have to give the body the message that they need to get stronger. And you don't give the body that message if you lift half of what you're capable of. So if you can bench press 200 pounds, you're not going to get stronger lifting 100 pounds. You need to get up into 180, 190 pound range to send the body the message that we need to get better to cope with this in the future. That's just common sense. Event-specific training, that is things like golf, tennis, diving, gymnastics, javelin, pole vault, very technique-specific events. And all you're doing is you're practicing a particular pathway for the brain to connect to a muscle. And like we said before, that we know in neurologically based chiropractic that practice does not make perfect. Practice makes permanent. So for the event-specific training, only when we do something correctly do we actually improve the skill. Then we are fostering those pathways that perform it correctly. So, stress versus benefit. Most people, when they talk about exercise, and there's this enormous misnomer and cliche out there, no pain, no gain. That is so far from the truth that it should be criminal. Exercise does not mean pain, sweat, and tears. Exercise simply means to activate the system. The purpose of exercise is up to you. What do you want with it? Do you want to lose weight? Do you want to get healthy? Do you want to get more clarity? Do you want to get more energy? Do you want to get more fit? Are you practicing for triathlon? Are you practicing for a race? Those are very different purposes. So you can't train one way and accomplish all of those. Most elite athletes are not necessarily very healthy. They're extremely fit, but they're always pushing their bodies to the limit, and it's on the verge of breaking down, and their internal organs are not typically very happy about it. They're being very, very stressed. So health and fitness are not the same thing. So if you exercise for health, we're simply talking about activating the system, putting your body through ranges of motion and regular activity that it is designed for. That will maintain the function, and that's what health is. If you want to get fit, then you want to start doing things that will make you fit. If you want to run a 10K race, you have to practice things that prepare you for a 10K race. Simple as that. However, if you don't exercise, it is not possible to optimize health. It just won't happen. Your body and brain is degenerating from disuse, and you're aging prematurely if you do not activate your system. If you exercise more than your body can recover from, then your exercise is destructive. So that's the first thing that we said, that exercise is stress. Exercise will break your body down, and it's only during the recovery that you rebuild it. So fortunately, the body recovers pretty quickly. So for most people, working out one day, they will have recovered within a day or two before they do the next workout. But a lot of people who get addicted to training, who work out every day, they're actually not getting better. They're breaking their body down, and they're never recovering back up to the level that they started. Now, another effect of exercise has to do with hormones. And there are two hormones in particular. There's three really with insulin, but we've covered insulin before. We've said that we reduce insulin resistance with exercise. So now we'll talk about cortisol and human growth hormone. So cortisol is a stress hormone. Its main purpose is to raise blood sugar. So if we produce cortisol on a regular basis as part of an emotional stress response or lifestyle stress response, that actually contributes to insulin resistance. Another function of cortisol is to inhibit the immune system. So chronic production of cortisol is not a good thing. As a matter of fact, it's probably linked to the majority of diseases that we experience in the Western world today, because most of those are linked to blood sugar and immune system. So exercise that is stressful will trigger cortisol. So therefore, we can't do that type of exercise a whole lot. Now let's go, this gets even more complicated, unfortunately. Human growth hormone is something that increases muscle mass and strengthens bone. It increases metabolism and fat burning. It supports function of insulin-producing cells. So it prevents you from becoming diabetic. It stimulates the immune system. And it even has anti-aging properties. So human growth hormone is a very, very positive hormone. It's a rejuvenating hormone. They even give it to elderly people who are degenerated past the point of a functional life, and they come back to more function. So we want more growth hormone and we want less cortisol. The problem is they both respond to high intensity exercise. So how do we get one without the other? So this is how it works. Cortisol is triggered by anaerobic workouts above 120 beats per minute. Human growth hormone is only triggered by extreme intensity workouts. So you have to do running or biking or something to get up to within 5 or 10 beats of your maximum heart rate. So if your heart rate's 180, 165 isn't enough. Even though that will make plenty of cortisol, it's not enough to trigger growth hormone to any large extent. Another way to do it is to lift weights. If you activate a large muscle group, preferably something to do with the legs, and you get within 90 to 100% of the maximum effort. So let's say that you're in the leg press machine and you can squat 300 pounds there. And let's say that you can do 250 pounds for 6 reps. Well, if you take 250 pounds and you're at least 80% of your maximum, and you do a set until near failure, that will also trigger growth hormone, because it's a message to the body that we are under stress. We need to grow and reproduce and get stronger so that we can cope with this in the future. Or if you do less than going to failure, you need to get within 90 to 95% of your maximum effort. So here's a little bit of dilemma. Anaerobic exercise makes cortisol, which we want to avoid. Extreme anaerobic exercise makes growth hormone that we want. So how do we solve this dilemma? We'll get to that in the next slide here. So let's just reiterate, from 100 to 120 or so is aerobic exercise. This will increase fat burning. It has very little impact on fitness. So if you're looking for fitness, pure aerobic exercise isn't going to do a whole lot for you. It will burn fat, it'll make you healthy, it'll activate all the systems we talked about, but you just won't get very fit. On the good side, it is very low stress. There's an insignificant amount of cortisol produced. Then when we get up into the 130 to 160, which is typical anaerobic range, now the proportion of fat burning decreases. We are burning proportionately more sugar because we need to get the energy faster. It still burns fat, but not the same percentage. This will produce more fitness, but it also contributes to more stress and, like we said, the cortisol. Now, assuming someone's 40 years old, their maximum heart rate is 180, they need to get up to about 175 in heart rate, or they need to do some maximum form of weight exercise. This is an extreme anaerobic exercise, so it decreases the initial fat burning. So while you're doing this, you're not really burning any fat, you're running on sugar. However, because of the growth hormone release, which can increase up to 300–400% in just a few seconds worth of work, you will improve your metabolism and you will increase your fat burning for the next 48+ hours. And this is why elite athletes are so ripped. That's why they have such a high metabolism, because they habitually get into that range of working out, so their bodies will burn a lot of fat, not during the workout, but afterwards. This is very high fitness and is extreme stress. So now we have the basic picture. Now we need to talk about how do we put this together so that we can get most of the benefits without killing ourselves. So when we see these middle-aged women in the gym with a personal trainer, and they have thin legs and they have a big belly that they're trying to work off, these people are in adrenal exhaustion. The reason that they have that body shape is they have exposed their bodies to chronic stress. They've made a lot of cortisol, they've exhausted their adrenals, which make the cortisol, and high intensity anaerobic exercise will make it worse. They may lose a few pounds from the sheer effort, but they will make the condition even worse. These people cannot get up into the range of making more cortisol if they want to get healthy. So that's a very, very important point to know. How do we balance this? Well, for anybody, you want to do 80 to 100% of your exercise aerobically. If you are stressed, if you have any sign of exhaustion or fatigue or disease or problems, you need to do 100% of your exercise aerobic. You are not ready for anaerobic exercise. You can do some weightlifting, keep it light, tone, do all those things, but you will not get healthier by getting into the anaerobic zone. you will do, for balance, for growth hormone, we do something called peak 8 workouts. And I will simply send you to mercola.com to look that up, because he talks very warmly about that type of exercise, and he will also give you good advice about who can and who can't do it and how much to do. But basically, even if you're in absolute fantastic shape, you do not want to do that more than twice a week, and those workouts do not last more than 10-15 minutes. So they have tremendous benefits for growth hormone, but you need to limit it because they're also very, very stressful and they break your body down. It takes several days to recover, even though it's only 15 minutes. And we're talking from a health perspective. So if you're stressed, obviously you do not want to do any of the peak 8 until your body has recovered. You can do, as you start getting a little better, you can do maybe a little bit of weights to trigger the growth hormone, but you probably want to avoid the high heart rates. Then you want to do anaerobic workouts in moderation. If you enjoy it, if you like going to the gym and doing the step aerobics, and which are actually anaerobics, they call them aerobics, but they are anaerobics because they always get over 120. If you enjoy that and you like some fitness, go ahead, because if you're healthy, then you'll get more fit and it's not going to hurt you. But don't do them every day because you will stress your adrenals. Also, add weight workouts. This is highly recommended because you will activate the body and the brain in a different way. You will activate muscles and joints very appropriately. And if you are not in fantastic shape, then just keep the weights down and keep everything light and easy, and then work your way up. Adjust to your fitness and health level. So that wraps it up for the most part on the basic principles. Again, the main thing to understand from this is that it's not about blood, sweat, and tears. It is about activating the body. So some of the things that I recommend the warmest are things like yoga and Tai Chi and Pilates, because they work in the aerobic zone. They activate your brain. You take your body through ranges of motion. So from a health standpoint, all of those are probably the best thing that you can do. And then if you want to add on other more intense forms later, then that'd be fine too. That concludes our presentation for today. So if you have any questions, I'll be happy to take those. And if not, we'll see you next time. Thank you.